started with our housekeeping items. And so the first piece is that any questions that you have over the course of our session, go ahead and type those into the chat function. That's where we want all the kind of interaction happening and going through. And so just to make sure that everybody knows where that chat function is, I want you to go ahead and type in there, which happy hour is this? Is this your first happy hour, second, third, fourth? Let me know kind of how many happy hours you have been on here. Second piece is that, as all of you can see, I do have the happy hour shirt on. It might still be in the AMs over here on the West Coast in Pacific time, but if you're feeling like it, get yourself a little drink, grab yourself a little snack, kick back and relax. And for any of you that are a little bit further east, definitely kick back with a little beer or wine, cocktail, mocktail. Let's enjoy this little Saturday here. And last piece is to sit somewhere comfortable so that you're not in working mode, working mind, working brain, any of that, but rather that you're into just rest and relaxation. All right, I can see a whole bunch of chats coming through. I'm seeing some firsts. Kelly, how you doing? It's her fourth time here. Helen's on her second. Laura, hey, great to have you on her fourth. Cybel is on 5+. So great to see you. So fun interacting with you on the different comments there. Hey, Donna, I can see it's your first time here. Awesome to have you. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And Rhea, yes, it is okay to have a drink at 11 a.m. here on this happy hour. All right. So, and then Richard, I can see you're a newbie here as well. Wonderful, wonderful to have you. And so for all of those that are on the newer side, where it's your first time joining one of these happy hours, my name is Jordan. I'm the founder here at Mind and Soil, and we're a mindful gardening business based out of Squamish, British Columbia, Canada. And we're entirely focused on introducing and connecting 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So for some of you that are on your fourth or fifth happy hour and you've been gardening maybe for a couple of years, I would strongly bet that one of the reasons why you love to garden is because of how peaceful it is, how soothing it is, how calming you find it to be. And for some of you that might be on the newer side to gardening in your first year, second year, I know that it can feel a little bit daunting, a little bit overwhelming, kind of a little bit of information overload at certain points and not really sure being what to do. That's generally the case when we try something new. And so for all of you that are on the newer side, especially, a huge part of our responsibility and duty here at Mind and Soil is to do tons of free education and learning like this so that you can feel comfortable and confident in the garden, such as when you're prepping your garden for the winter, so that that time isn't spent stressing, wondering if you're doing something right, but rather purely into the restorative side of gardening. So I really encourage you to subscribe to us on YouTube here, because we put out new videos every single week, and you're going to get tons and tons of information, learnings from there. Plus, if you have a question at any point in time, you can just leave that on the video and you'll see that I respond to each and every one of them. I know some of the folks that are on the happy hour here have been commenting on those, and they can attest to all the responses they get and how quickly they get those responses. And then I also encourage you to hop over to Instagram, follow us there. Any messages that you send through to us, we answer all of those. And again, we'll help kind of answer any questions so that you can be feeling as comfortable and as confident in the garden. And so for today, we are, of course, focused on prepping the garden for the winter. And so we're going to do a couple of things here where we're just going to kind of go through closing the garden. You know, this past season here, I had my absolute best harvest that I've ever had. And I do attribute an amount of that success to what I did right at this time last year. Right before I kind of called it quits on gardening for the winter and went inside, there were a couple of last pieces that I did that really set me up for success this past season. So we're going to walk through those. And then I want everybody kind of hanging around for this, and I'm going to be joining all of you in the happy hour at this point. I've got a little bottle of champagne because this is the last happy hour of the season here. We've made it. We've done a whole ton of these. And so I kind of want to celebrate with all of you as well. And I'm going to do that when we do our 2022 sneak peek. I'm so excited to share all of this with you. This is the first time that we're going to be sharing any of our plans for 2022. So really excited for you all to be the first ones to see some of the things that we're going to be doing next year. So with that being said, those of you that have been on a happy hour before, you know what I'm about to say. If you are all set for us to begin diving in, then type into the chat function, "Let's grow. One last time here. All righty. And as those start coming through, I wanted to share a quick little message with you from Regula, who I'm not sure, she might be on the call here today, but she sent me this picture just about a week or so ago of her pepper plant that she brought inside. Look at my tree. About 20 small but very flavorful peppers turning ever more red. Thanks to your October happy hour, I took the big pot indoors. Such a joy. Happy indoor gardening. So absolutely over the moon to see this work out. And this is a little bit different to the overwintering of peppers that we do. This was just bringing a plant in that was still in its full growth mode, and it had a whole bunch of green fruit on it. But by bringing it indoors, putting it into that windowsill, all those fruits that were still on the plant, as we can see, have all started to ripen up. So I hope that each and every one of you take some kind of learnings like that from this happy hour on prepping your garden for the winter. And I know some of you are wondering how my pepper plants are doing that I'm overwintering. Take a look at this one here with just kind of how lush and full of life it is looking at. So I have pruned it all the way back. You can see all the prune marks here, and all of this new growth is already coming in. We're only in November. It's just going to be vegetating between now and May of next season. So this is going to be a beautiful plant to be putting into the garden. All right. Kelly's saying, let's grow. Helen's saying, let's grow. Heather is saying, let's grow. Right on. Let's grow. Let's grow. Perfect. All righty, folks. Well, let's go ahead and start diving in here. And so when it comes to prepping the garden for the winter, the very first thing that we need to do, it actually isn't even in the garden whatsoever, but rather it's reflecting and it's slowing down. When we think about it right now, all of our learnings, all of our experience from this past season, it's top of mind in our head right now. And it's going to kind of fade into the distance over the course of the winter. So we want to spend a few minutes just quickly reflecting on the season before then actually getting out there to close the garden for the winter. And so at the end of this happy hour, I'm going to send you our guide for prepping your garden for the winter. And it's got the questions in there. So don't feel that you need to jot all these down right now, but rather I would encourage you to share in the chat function your response to each one of them. And I'll share mine as well here. So the first question that I encourage you to reflect on, and once again, if you're feeling up to it, go ahead and share in the chat function. The question is, which plants brought me the most joy and happiness through the season? All right, so just kind of slow down on each of your ends and just kind of think through, what were the plants out there in my garden that I really, really enjoyed this past year? And what you're going to notice with these reflection questions that I have is that they're not necessarily focused on what grew best, what didn't grow very well, but rather more so like, what did the garden bring you? What brought you joy? What felt like a chore? Because again, I'm such a big believer that gardening should be our sanctuary that we look forward to. And so we want to keep that in mind when we're doing our reflection here. All right, so for Jane, it was the soybeans, and for Laura, her zucchini there. Shannon, the leeks and jalapenos, the tomatoes. Perfect. Kristen, the fava beans. Faith, the garlic. Amazing. Jim as well, the garlic. Love it. So the plants that brought me the most joy this past season, I'd absolutely put garlic into that category. It's a crop that I just always love to be growing. And I made a couple of tweaks last year that really paid off, and really like the crop in 2021 compared to 2020 was just like a whole other level. So that was really nice, really fun, really made me happy to see, okay, I thought that these variables, if I changed them, would yield a better crop. And sure enough, that ended up being the case. I also got a lot of joy out of growing my pepper plants this year. For those of you that have been on multiple happy hours, you know that I'm kind of having a love affair with pepper plants. And, you know, I didn't have the absolute best yield on my peppers. I put them into stress. So I cut the water. And just before that, I gave them a big feed of bat guano, which really helps with the flowering. But I did that a little bit too late in the season. And so ultimately, a lot of the plants, they had all these beautiful fruits on them, but they just didn't have quite enough of a window to ripen up. And so I say that, you know, it brought me a lot of joy because I have so much excitement already thinking about next season and the little experiments that I'm going to be doing with my peppers, similar to what I did with the garlic last year. All right, question number 2. Which plants frustrated you and brought you negative energy? So spend a minute or two here thinking through, and then go ahead and share those in the chat function as well. Which were the plants that frustrated you and that brought you negative energy? And when I think about this, I think through like, what are the ones that I wasn't really looking forward to going out there and seeing how they were doing, or how they were responding to things that I just wasn't all that excited about. All right, I can see apple trees coming through there. So plants that frustrated me the most this past season, I would definitely put my strawberries into that category because they were growing really well, had beautiful foliage, lots of flowers, but then the flowers stayed really small and I didn't, get too many of those really big, beautiful, ripe strawberries. So that's something that I'm going to be playing around with next year. And then another one was the broccoli. And so with broccoli, it was once again growing beautiful, but then we had the huge heat wave and essentially every single one of them, except for one, bolted, went to flower, didn't really get the beautiful heads of broccoli that we're hoping for. And that was, a little bit frustrating. The key point on number 2 here is, did it frustrate you and you're like, I don't care to grow that in the future? If that's the case, make note of that and make sure that you don't have that included in your gardening plan that you put together in January, February of next year. But if it's, say, like broccoli for me, where it's like, I'm frustrated, but I definitely want to give it another try, then definitely include it in your gardening plan for next year. And so for myself on that front, I'll do an early season crop of broccoli, but I've been hearing from a number of folks in our community that they've had a lot of success with doing a fall crop of broccoli. So I'm definitely going to be doing a succession round of broccoli there. Okay, Kristen, you and me both on the strawberries there. Those ones are definitely, tricky for me. And then Helen, I can see the pepper plants and the fennel. Crystal, the cucumbers. Oh, Crystal, you'll have to shoot me a message on the cucumbers there because I had a lot of success with them this year. So maybe I'll be able to troubleshoot some things for you. All right. Adrian, broccoli suffered as well. Claude, the garlic was very small. Claude, definitely check out some of our videos on growing garlic there so that hopefully we get some better ones going for you next year. Lisa, I hear you as well on the arugula. I've had mixed feelings about arugula because of that bolting side. But I do like that kind of middle range on arugula. Once it gets its first flowers and you pop those off, the leaves get a little bit spicier. I really like them in that window, but it's only like a few week window out of, kind of probably 90 days worth of growing or so. So I'm kind of in like I'm not sure if I want to continue growing at camp with arugula. All right, 2 questions down. We've only got 2 more questions to go. So we're nearly through the reflection period. The third question is, what am I curious and fascinated to grow next season? All right, what's everybody curious and fascinated to be growing next season? And so on this front, do think about this in terms of vegetables and fruits and herbs that you could be putting in your garden, or flowers as well, but also not just growing, but garden projects as well. Is there something that you want to do from a container perspective, from a bed perspective, from a watering and irrigation perspective, other structures, perhaps like greenhouse? What are those things that you can tell are already exciting you for next season there? Go ahead and share those in the chat function there. All right, I'm seeing potatoes, eggplants, peas and beans, garlic for Janet, Val's looking for hops and hydrangeas. Amazing. So for myself on this one, the crops that I'm really kind of curious and fascinated to grow next season, one is definitely potatoes. I'm really looking forward to running some experiments to figure out the kind of absolute best and most optimal growing environment and conditions for potatoes. I'm also really looking to kind of upskill on rooted crops. So carrots, beets, turnips. I'm going to be doing a couple of experiments there to really try and master that area. And then the third piece is, as some of you might know, I had a lot of battles with irrigation, getting that set up this past year. And now it works really nicely, but it all pulls from like my city water line. And that's a lot of water. And so I want to start moving towards rain barrels and using those. And so I actually have multiple rain barrels set up. And those I've started tinkering and playing around with to get the gravity feed correct on them. And so next season, I will be able to kind of start transforming the first part of my bed off of the water line and onto rain barrels, which I'm really, really looking forward to doing there. All righty. Adrian's going to be trying potatoes. Jan's going to be giving artichokes a whirl. Janine's going to be rejuvenating her herb garden. I love that. And Vera down there is going to be trying no dig gardening. Amazing. All right. Last question is, what felt like a chore or work that you want less of next season? So what were the things in the garden that felt like a chore that you're like, oh, I don't want to go out there and do that. It's not calling me. I wish that I didn't have to get to that thing in my garden. Let's hear what some of those things were. Because those are the pieces that we want to be trying to figure out how to remove. So 2 years ago, for me, this was watering. I was still hand watering everything at that point in time. And it just like the garden was getting so large at that point that I just didn't have the time to really be enjoying it. I was kind of rushing through it, which is why I shifted to irrigation this past season, which was a huge win. I got to spend so much more time just with the plants opposed to watering. And then for this coming year, one thing that I've noticed is I've got like a good amount of volunteer seeds, which requires a lot of weeding in the garden. And so I do like, part of me really loves just being out there weeding. So I don't want to like completely eliminate it, but I'm going to start playing around with leaving landscape fabric over the beds and then planting into holes in the landscape fabric to see just kind of what that does with the plants. And if any of those volunteers are no longer coming back and coming through. All right, Susan was frustrated with watering. Vera was frustrated, sounds like, with picking too many raspberries. Hey, I'll gladly take that problem off of your hands there. Faith had some challenges with aphids. I'm in that same boat there as well. Got some really great solutions to aphids that we're going to be sharing for next season that I'm really, really excited about. All right, Claude for some thinning. Rayanne for protecting the crops from birds and rodents. Totally hear you on that front. For Jim, trying to control the slugs. I also had some really great learnings with slugs this past season here. So we'll be sharing all of that in some videos on our YouTube account this coming year. Amazing. Perfect. So what we want to be doing with those that feel like a chore or work is we want to kind of be removing those or finding a way where we get to spend less time on those and more on the things that we love in the garden, the things that bring us joy, the things that bring us happiness. So again, before we even get out into the garden, we want to spend a minute or two reflecting on these 4 questions. And I'm going to be sending through the guide to everybody on these 4 questions so you can go through them in greater detail at any point through the winter here. Now, let's head out to the garden here and start getting our hands dirty with actually wrapping up the garden for the winter here. And there's only 3 steps that we need to be kind of going through. And the second step, the step that we're about to do, is definitely like the biggest, the meatiest. But if you get that one, then the rest is a breeze. So hang with me here through step number 2. And step number 2, I'm just going to grab a quick sip of water, is all around what do we do with our different types of plants. And there's 3 real categories that we're going to be talking about: annuals, biennials, and perennials. I'm not going to touch too much on flowers, roses, shrubs, trees, because that's not a world that I have a lot of expertise in. We're going to stay kind of focused in the fruits, vegetable, herbs space. And I want to go through each of these one by one, just kind of talk through what we want to be doing with each of them as we think through prepping the garden for winter and wrapping it all up. So with our annuals, these are our plants that die off at the end of the season when the conditions are no longer favorable. So it's getting colder and colder, things are going to start dying off. Some of the examples on this front are our tomatoes, our cucumbers, squash, broccoli, zucchinis, peppers, etc. So those are all going to be dying off. They're not going to be growing back into the garden next year. And so what do we be doing with those? We need to be getting those out of the garden and into the compost. And the big question that would come up with annuals is, how do we get them out of the garden? Do we cut them at the base, where we would be, trying to just leave the root system in the soil to not disturb the soil ecosystem? Or do we just pull the whole plant out of the garden? Now, might be a little bit of a surprise, but I actually prefer to pull the whole plant out of the garden. I'm going to show you in a video how I go about doing that in just a second. But the reason why is because, first and foremost, like our rooted crops, like our beets, carrots, etc., those vegetables, we are pulling those out and disturbing the soil ecosystem a little bit regardless. Same thing with, say, like potatoes. So, and each of those beds have continued to do really, really well for me. So I'm not terribly concerned about that little bit of, just kind of like disturbance that would be occurring there. And then the second piece is that from the time of pulling them out around now to getting new things into the garden, I've found that there just isn't enough time for that root system to be fully breaking down. And so I'd rather get that out into the compost, let it compost, decompose over there, and then get it back into the garden as finished compost. So to pull those annuals, it's super, super easy. All I do is I go to the plant and then I just yank it from right near the soil, right where it's going into the soil. I grab it there and just pull it up and out. Sometimes, I'll brush a little bit of the soil off to keep that in the bed, but then otherwise I just pop them out and then toss them over into my compost. So really, really simple, really, really straightforward when it comes to getting our annuals out of the bed. Now, let's go ahead and hop into our biennials. And these are our plants that are not perennials that are going to grow on and on. They're not annuals that are going to die off on 1 year, but rather plants that are going to grow for a year. They're going to survive through the winter. And then in kind of like March, April, right as we're getting ready to go to the season, they are then going to go to flower. So they basically go to flower at the beginning of year 2. And a couple of the examples on this front are kale and Swiss chard. And then I also like to think that there's kind of a category of cold hardy cousins that aren't technically biennials, but follow a similar pattern. And that would include Brussels sprouts, onions, celery, beets, carrots, cabbage, etc. And with these ones, we want to be leaving them in the garden and letting them grow all through the winter into the early spring. So let's say like my Brussels sprouts, I've got some carrots, I've got some beets, they're still out there in the garden. And I'll just pick those when I'm ready to eat them and enjoy them over the course of the winter. And as a matter of fact, the plants begin to taste better and better as we get into the winter because it begins to create this kind of glucosey liquid that serves as an antifreeze and really kind of makes the fruits and the vegetables feel a little bit sweeter, just a little bit more full of life. So I really encourage you to try that out with some of these plants. And then your kale and your Swiss chard, those are going to go to flower in March, April. You'll see them, they get really, really tall, 7-8 feet, and you could pull them out at that point in time. All right, excuse me. And last but not least is our perennials here. And so our perennials, these are plants that are going to grow back each year. And the real beauty with them is that once we get them into the garden and established, then we don't have to take them out. We don't have to do too much. They become lower and lower maintenance, but their yield increases and increases each and every year. So this is a category that I'm also really curious and really fascinated by, and how I can go about incorporating more and more of this into my garden. So some of the examples on this front include asparagus, rhubarb, raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and then a lot of the herbs like chives, horseradish, mint, sage, etc. So those are all perennials that they're going to be growing back each and every season. So we definitely do not want to be taking them out of the garden. But do we prune them? And so for myself, my personal preference here, and this is not an absolute like must do, must not do, but rather just personal preference, is that I like to wait until the springtime for my pruning. So remember that pepper plant that I showed you at the very beginning where I had put all those prune marks on it? The new growth was coming directly underneath where we pruned it. We prune to promote new growth. But for new growth to occur, we need to be in a growing season. And we're going into a dormant season where it's going to be too cold, too wet, too dark for things to be growing. So pruning to me doesn't make a ton of sense. I would rather save that for the springtime, where as soon as we make that prune, new growth is going to come in from just below that at the kind of closest node to it. And on top of that, there could be little flowers, there could be seed pods, and there could be foliage that's going to serve as food for birds and other garden critters, as well as kind of like just like a home for them over the course of the winter here. So it means that, the garden for me, it looks maybe not completely cleaned up in some ways, but I'm doing that intentionally to provide a little bit of food for them. And I go out to, make my coffee in the morning. I look right out at the garden, and basically every single morning I see little birds jumping around, eating little bits of compost, leaves, and all those little seed pods as well. So what we do with them is we leave them in the garden, and we want to be protecting them and insulating them so that they can be growing well the next season. And that really leads us into step 3 and step 4 here. So we're nearly through our protecting the winter, which means that it's just around the corner that we're going to be talking about that 2022 sneak peek here. So with step 3, this is feeding the soil. And you know already that the name of the game for me is compost, compost, compost. And part of that is because we get the nutrients into the soil and we get the microbes into the soil. And the plants and the garden beds, they need that right now. So when you think about each one of those beds that you see in the picture there, those had tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, zucchinis growing in there, pulling tons and tons of nutrients from the soil. And so these beds are at their most depleted state right now. So rather than waiting until April, May to begin to rejuvenate them, let's get some compost in there so that the microbes and the organisms can eat away at it to begin freeing up new nutrients so that by the time we get to April, May of next year, they're full of life. And then we'll talk about the insulation piece in just a second. So how do we go about doing this? Well, I've got a video for that, and it's super, super straightforward. All that we do is we grab our compost. Again, if you've got your own, perfect. If not, something like sea soil works great. And then we're just going to dump that into the beds. And then we are going to just kind of gently move it throughout the garden there. And you want to spread that evenly. So you've got about 1 to 2 inches all across the bed. And so I'm doing that on each one of my beds where I had those annuals growing, just to top them up, get them rejuvenated, and some new nutrients back in there. Now, what about our perennials and our biennials? We are going to do essentially the exact same thing. So see this rosemary plant, which is a perennial. I'm just going up to it and I'm putting, again, that 1 to 2 inches all around the base of the plant. Now, this is on one hand providing those nutrients and microbes, but this is also providing 1 to 2 inches of insulation. So when we look at that rosemary plant that I have in the back there, it's in its first year. This is going to be the most difficult winter for it to make it through. But if it makes it through this one, the following winters are going to be easier because it's more established. And so I really want to be protecting that root system. And if the root system is here, if I've now added 2 inches of compost on top, well, now the cold weather, it's been insulated away from that root system by those 2 inches of compost. So it's not only giving us those nutrients and those microbes, but also a little bit of insulation to help them survive through the winter. And as you can see there, I was pushing it back onto those raspberry bushes as well there. All righty. So we are about to dive into the final piece, which is mulching and covering the beds. And what I would love for you to do is in the chat function, type in any questions that you have in terms of prepping the garden for the winter, because we'll pause, answer a few of those before we then dive into the very last part, which is going to be our sneak peek for 2022. So any questions that you have on how to be putting your garden to sleep for the winter, getting it all prepped and ready for the winter, go ahead, type those into the chat function, and then we'll get to a couple of those after we go through the mulching section here. All righty. So for mulching and covering the beds, what we're doing here is we've put that nice layer of compost in there, and that's primarily providing those nutrients and the microbes, but it is also providing some insulation. And so with a mulch, such as our leaves, but you could also use something like hay or straw. I can't remember which one has the seeds in it, but don't use that one. Yeah, you want to use straw, don't use hay. Or something even like I've heard of people using kelp in their beds. I personally like to go with leaves because they're so readily available. And all that you're going to be doing is piling these into the beds, which is, again, adding more organic matter, more homes for our little microbes and organisms, but then also a kind of layer of insulation. And so all that you need to do here, I've got a video for it, is just rake up your leaves that might be in your backyard. If you don't have leaves, then you could go to a park and pick a whole bunch up. And you're going to then pop those into the bed. And then you're just going to evenly kind of spread them all throughout. Now, bonus little tip here, which you're about to see, is that I like to mound mine in the middle so that there's kind of a peak in the middle. And as you can see there, right, like I'm doing probably 10, 12 inches worth of leaves in these beds that have annuals in it. I'm going to explain why I like to kind of mound them up in the middle there in just a second. And with our biennials and our perennials, we are doing the exact same thing. So with that rosemary plant, I'm just going in there and I'm adding a heck of a lot of leaves into it, getting it totally filled up. And then the rosemary or the raspberry bush, once again, adding leaves all over that, pushing them so they're nice over top of where that root system would be, so that the entire bed is nicely covered with the leaves. And then once you've got the leaves in there, what's going to happen, right, is that we've got these winter winds that are coming through, and they could end up really blowing a lot of these leaves away. And so my kind of recommendation, what I love to do, is to put a cover over top of them. I personally use landscape fabric. I know a lot of kind of smaller scale organic farms, they just put a tarp straight across it so that no water can get through. But you could also use something like cardboard. All that we're trying to do is keep the leaves in place and then keep some of the rain from coming into the beds. And so what that looks like, as you can see here, is I'm taking my landscape fabric, throwing it across the bed, and then I just grab some like kind of good sized rocks and put them on the corners to keep that kind of pushed down nice and light, or nice and tight there. And then that mound in the middle, as you can see, when water hits that now, it's going to be running off to the sides there rather than fully just running through the beds. Perfect. So I want to pause for a moment now. I can see a bunch of questions that are coming through here. So I'm going to try and get to a couple of these. So question from Val here. I've planted garlic this fall. Would I cover this bed? Yes, Val, absolutely. Feel free to get a couple of inches of compost on there. You want the garlic cloves to be about 4 inches beneath the surface. And then definitely feel free to add on as much mulch as you would like. What I personally do with mine is I add, a good 6 inches of leaves. I put landscape fabric over top. And then what I do is around January 1st on like New Year's Day, it's a little bit of a, I guess, tradition, is I'll pull the landscape fabric off so that a little bit more light can start getting through to where the garlic would be. So that's what I personally do on that front. Perfect. Question from Lynn here. Can you use shredded leaves as mulch? Absolutely, Lynn. If you've got shredded leaves, by all means, use those. If you only have leaves that are like recently off the trees, they're going to get a little bit shredded over the course of the winter just from all the little organisms in there and the natural decaying process. So at the end of the winter, they're going to be really nicely, beautifully shredded leaves. I take them off at that point and put them into a compost to like fully break down. But some people at that point would just work them into the soil as well. Again, my personal preference though is to put them first through a hot compost pile. All right. Question from Kristen here. Is there any way to reduce slugs when mulching? That's a good question. So yeah, slugs definitely like that darker environment. You'd want to try to remove kind of any like bigger rocks or pieces of wood so they can't be hiding in and around those. And then the other piece that you could be doing is using something like a beer trap if they were like really causing a lot of problems or damages. But that's where you're going to have to make a little bit of a call, right? Like what is your tolerance level for slugs? Because the leaves and the mulch definitely would provide a bit of a home environment for them. And so if you're absolutely hating having slugs in your garden, then I would probably encourage you to maybe move away from doing tons and tons of mulching. But if you're okay with them kind of cruising around, taking a couple of bites of the leaves, then you could by all means leave that. One thing that I do with my, to kind of keep the slugs in check is I find that they generally go after my leafy greens. And so what I do is I leave 4 or 5 leaves low on the plant. And then as the stem continues to grow, I harvest those. So there's like a good 6, 7, 8-inch gap between these bottom leaves that I let them go after and the top leaves, which are the ones that I eat and harvest there. Perfect. All right, Janine, can I combine peat moss and sea soil for a mulch? Yeah, you absolutely could use that. That would be more similar to like the adding of compost than a mulch, but it's going to serve the 2 primary purposes of getting nutrients in there from the compost, as well as some insulation with just the volume that you would have there. And those are both great things to always have more and more of in your bed. So there's definitely no like downside to adding those, just a little bit different than a mulch. All right. Okay, so question from Kelly here. I have already mulched. Can I pull that back still and add compost? Yes, you absolutely could pull that quickly off. Full transparency, I probably am pulling leaves off and like refilming things quickly and then putting them back on. So by no means is it like you have to do it once and then never touch it until the spring. You absolutely could pull those off, put some compost in there, and then pop them back on top for sure. All right. And question from Marilyn, oak tree leaves. I believe those would be all good. Marilyn, you might just want to quickly do a search on which leaves to not use as a mulch, because I do believe that there are a couple that people don't like to have in their garden. Full transparency from my end, I'll just use whatever is on my yard property. I don't even know what all the trees are, but they all end up in my beds, and they end up growing really quite well. So I'm not too picky on that front. All right, question from Lisa, is now the time to add manure as well? Absolutely, you could be adding some manure into your beds. That will break down, cool off through the winter really nicely. Alternatively, if you have that manure, you could build that into a compost pile. So I use chicken manure, but I don't put that fresh into my beds. I first put it through a hot compost pile where it heats the pile up, creates this really beautiful compost, and then I put that finished compost into the garden beds there. All right, from Adrian, when do you decide to cover over the mulch or not, like with burlap? In terms of when, I'm not sure if I'm completely following the question there, but I would just kind of put that cover over top whenever I have time to, once I've got the leaves on there. So usually it happens in the same day. The bigger question is usually like, when are there enough leaves for me to get those onto the beds? And then once I've raked all those up, put them on the beds, immediately after that, I put that cover over top there. All right, I think we're going to answer maybe 2 more questions, and then we can answer some more towards the end here. Okay. Question from S. What type of manure is best for raised beds? Steer, chicken, etc. Both of those would work great. A lot of people use steer, a lot of people use chicken. I personally go with chicken, but again, I put that through my compost pile first. But those would be both great options there. A lot of folks also use mushroom manure as another option there. Okay, question from Angelo. How can you get rid of powdery mildew on squash and cucumbers? Is it okay to use the same soil for planting again if you amend it? This is a great question for us to wrap up this part of the Q&A on, because I think it does kind of lead into the 2022 season. So powdery mildew, I did a couple of videos on it this past year. It's pretty much inevitable that it is going to happen. I tried about 3 different sprays. None of them worked. And then finally I was like, nope, I'm going to keep on working on this. I think that I'll find and figure something out. And I have finally figured out a powdery mildew spray that works. We're going to do a video on it next year, but I'm going to share the recipe with each and every one of you right now so that you have that on hand for next season. So Angelo, I need you to write this down. You need a spray bottle. Once you have that spray bottle, you need 1 teaspoon of neem oil, N-E-E-M. And then you need 2 to 3 drops of Dr. Bronner's soap, ideally the peppermint type. Apparently, the powdery mildew doesn't like peppermint. And so you're going to add that teaspoon of neem oil, those 2 to 3 drops of that soap into the spray bottle, and then warm water. You're going to shake that up really nicely, and then you're going to cover the leaves with that. So you're going to spray it all over the top of the leaves and the bottom of the leaves. And then you're going to have to come back probably 36, 48 hours later and do it again. And you're going to continue to do that as a bit of a maintenance program over the course of the season. You're going to see the videos on it and what I saw on my plants, but it was like night and day difference, how well the plants did when I sprayed them with that and how little powdery mildew they had and how green the leaves all stayed versus the other ones that weren't receiving that spray and just had powdery mildew all over them there. So that's the recipe. And then next year, we are going to be doing a full video on exactly how that recipe works. Perfect. So the last thing that you get to do is you get to kick back and relax. The garden is put away and it is all prepped for the winter. Again, I'm going to send through that guide to everybody and we'll do a little bit more Q&A towards the end here. But what it is time for is for us to be going into our 2022 sneak peek. And so I'm going to go and grab a little bit of, or that little bottle of champagne that I mentioned that I had, because I want to join all of you in this last little portion of our last happy hour for the year here. But if you're ready and if you're excited for us to see a little bit and to kind of pull back the curtains a little bit on some of the things that we're going to be doing for 2022, then I want you to type into the chat function, let's grow 2022. I'm going to go grab that champagne, but type in the chat function, let's grow 2022, and then we'll start diving into a couple of the things that we have planned for next year. All right, I'm seeing some Let's Grow 2022 coming through. I got my champagne here. This is the first time that I get to join all of you in the happy hour. All righty, there we go. I've got myself my little glass here. Perfect. Well, before we get into the 2022 side, I want to just take a second to say thank you so much to each and every one of you. You know, when we kicked off the session at the beginning, I asked who's been on a happy hour before, and there are a lot of folks here that have said, you know, been on 2, 3, 4, 5. And, you know, there's a lot of work and energy that goes into getting these ready, right? From literally buying full raised beds to build, and all of the soil supplies to fill those up, and then filming it, and then thinking through how to put together a deck like this where it's, you know, on one part entertaining and fun and something that people will look forward to, but then also too, like educational for you to be feeling more comfortable and more confident. So all of the, you know, individuals who have purchased things from us this year, thank you so much for the support. And all of you that have joined for these and been asking the amazing questions, the amazing engagement all throughout. I just want to say thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It means the world to us. And we're so excited for 2022. So cheers to 2021. Now, let's start diving in. So we've been hard at work over here already getting all set and ready for the 2022 season. And we're doing some things that I like. It's taking what we started this year to a whole new level for next year. So I want to touch on just first a couple of things that we're going to be continuing in 2022. And so the happy hours like this, they go on. We are going to be back up and running in January with getting the garden, kind of the perfect plan in place for the season ahead. We're going to have happy hours all through the year. Some of the same topics like how to be going about starting seeds, but then also new topics like succession planting, companion planting, etc. So lots and lots of happy hours will be happening next year. They're only going to continue to get bigger and better. All right. Second piece that is continuing for next year is that our individual soils, so our seedling mix, our worm castings, and the amendments like the 444 superfood, you'll be able to continue to buy those in individual orders so that you can be topping up kind of your supplies. If you need more worm castings, you can grab it. If you need more superfood, you can grab it. If you need more seedling mix for that succession crop, you can grab it. So all of that is going to be continuing along. I see Kelly saying woot woot, Paula saying yes for the happy hours. Amazing. And Janine's already asking when the worm castings are going to be available again. Hang tight on that one. It's just around the corner. All right. So those are two pieces that are continuing for next season. Now, what are we starting for next year? Well, in just a few short weeks, it is our first birthday. So Mind and Soil turns 1 year old on December 5th, 2021. Which I just so happened to launch the company on World Soil Day. So on December 5th, World Soil Day, it's our first birthday. And we have a little birthday gift for each and every one of you. And I'm going to share this riddle with the broader community on the beginning of December, but I'll let each and every one of you start thinking through it right now. And so the riddle that will help you understand what the birthday gift is that we got for all of you is, how can you get your hands dirty and experience gardening's mental health benefits without a garden and in the middle of the winter? All right, one more time. How can you get your hands dirty and experience gardening's mental health benefits in the middle of winter and without a garden? So start thinking through that riddle. And then before you know it, we'll be sharing what that birthday gift is with each and every one of you. And again, that is going to be something that everybody will have access to. All righty. So next piece for 2022 that's going to be happening is our YouTube. We are kind of officially launching. We've been, playing around with that a little bit. It's, I'd say pretty close to like an official account now, but this is something that we're going to be like doubling, tripling down on next year. We're probably going to have 2 to 3 videos coming out every single week, so that not only when we're doing a happy hour is that when we're going to be able to interact, but rather you're going to have videos each and every week for what's happening in the season at that point in time, so that again, any of the guesswork is taken away from your end, and that you're able to just be enjoying the gardening process as much as possible. So again, really encourage you to subscribe on the channel here, because it's going to be where we're putting tons and tons of content. All right, next piece is we are going to have Hori Hori knives. I've got it right here. You've probably seen it in a bunch of our pictures. These will be available for sale, for purchase on our website next year. They're going to be laser etched and engraved with our Mind and Soil logo. And those are going to be available for everybody to be purchasing next season. Okay, now we've got 2 final pieces, and these are the 2 that I am most excited for. Had to have a little sip of my champagne before diving into them. So the first piece is that this year in 2021, we've been really focused on like those individual soils. So a seedling mix or worm castings. And again, those are going to be available to purchase individually next year. But for next year, what we are going to be, primarily focused on from a physical products perspective is gardening kits. And so the very first one that we're going to have available for next season is going to be our seed starting kit. And when you get this, it's literally going to have everything that you need to be successfully starting your seeds. Seedling mix, grow light, a tray, seed cells, seeds, and then all the education so that you are absolutely set up for success. I guarantee anybody that is using that will be successfully starting seeds. I've got the first one right here. I want to show you. Here it is. Oh. And so we'll be able to ship these all across Canada. And it is just jam-packed with goodies. And you're going to have like literally the exact same seed starting setup that you can have in your house as what I'm using over there, where I start all of my seeds. And then that's going to roll into transplant kit, to the garlic kit, potentially even like a maintenance kit for any of those pests, insects that you have in the garden, so that you're fully set up. You don't have to be going to a million different places to try and find all these loose ends, but rather it arrives at your door and you're ready to go. So gardening kits are happening. And then the last piece that we're going to be launching next season is our Mindful Gardening Club. And this is what we're going to be doing for those individuals that really want to tap into our way of gardening and focusing on the mental health side of it. And so with this Mindful Gardening Club, like we're absolutely going to be doing tons of, kind of like exclusive education and learning. But we're also going to be really ramping up kind of how to be going about activating your senses in the garden, how to have it as a sanctuary and a place that you absolutely are looking forward to. And then we're going to have expert support in there as well, so that if at any point you have a question throughout the gardening season, you're getting an answer to that question within 24 hours, so that we are right there with you all through the journey. And then all of the community that would go around that as well. So that's going to be the kind of the sixth and final piece for the 2022 season here. So some things that are continuing along, and then lots and lots of new and exciting pieces. I would absolutely love to hear kind of your thoughts, any feedback in the chat function there. And for anybody that is wanting to get their hands on worm castings, or for anybody that is wanting to buy, like say, gift cards for the holidays here, or the Hori Hori knives, etc., we are doing pre-orders now and kind of starting that up over the course of the coming weeks here. And so if you're interested in anything for next season, can feel a little bit more of that champagne there, then all I need you to do is just send me an email right now, jordan@mindandsoil.com, and let me know what kind of the products are that you'd be interested in or what you're looking to get your hands on, so that as soon as we're able to put those on the website, we're able to let you know immediately. So please, please, please let me know on that front there. Perfect. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear kind of any thoughts, as well as any additional questions that you have, folks. That's absolutely everything that I wanted to cover off on here today. And again, thank you all so much for being involved in the journey all the way so far this season. All right. Diane's wondering there, what is a hori knife? So Diane, this is, and say like the folks over at West Coast Seeds, Annie, who runs their farm there, this is our absolute favorite garden tool. It is essentially like part shovel, part knife with a measuring stick on it here. And so this is what I use, like say when I'm planting my garlic, I measure everything out, 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches. I pop it down, 4 inches down, make a little bit of a hole, can get my worm castings in there, get the garlic clove in there, off to the races. And then when it comes to like pulling things out, you can dig down underneath, pull it out. This side is like serrated here, so you can be cutting anything that you need. It's just like such a good multifunctional tool to have around and have on hand there. Yeah, Lynn's mentioned there, couldn't garden without my hori knife. It's one of those things that like once people have it, it's just like you can't go back from it afterwards. All right, Rayanne's loving the creation of the club there. Perfect, amazing. Val's loving the kits. Right on. Hey, Tagio, woohoo! Great to see you here. Yeah, so Tack was asking powdery mildew control kit. That's what we're thinking through with our maintenance kit for next year. Is you're having some neem oil in there, having that spray bottle in there, having that soap in there, so that again you don't have to go and try and find all these things, because it's a specific type of neem oil that you would want to be using. Basically taking like the multiple years of experimenting and playing around that I've been doing, and then streamlining the whole process for you on that front. Alrighty, Val's asking there, how much for the hori knife? Val, shoot me through that email. Well, the price that we're probably going with is going to be $49 on that front. Paula, thank you so much. Yeah, we are like absolutely over the moon excited for 2022 here. And yeah, Shannon, is that the one that you cut the beets with like a ninja? Absolutely, that's the one. Everybody's mentioning that, yeah, the hori knife, they like to use them. Rayanne, thank you so much for the words on the first year here. Really, really appreciate that. And then Susan, hang tight on the neem oil peppermint spray. I have a feeling that we'll have that available as a kit for next season. We've been putting all of our like focus energy into getting the seed starting kit ready, because you know, there's so many different pieces to it that we need to figure out the suppliers for all that and get it all here. But we now have it. Like yesterday, we measured it all out, had it all in there. It looks so good. So now we can start moving on to those next kits there. Claude, thank you so much. Perfect. Jane, Brussels sprouts make for a great Christmas meal. So if yours are still in the garden at Christmas time, then definitely, yeah, consider pulling them out at that point to use them for Christmas. Perfect. Well, I think that might be everything here, folks. I'm just going to hang around for 1 or 2 more minutes to see if there's any other questions. Otherwise, we'll start signing off here. And yeah, we're gonna, you know, be wrapping up here for the happy hours for this year. But then in January next year, it's full steam ahead, getting their garden ready for next year. Thank you so much for the kind words coming through there, Diane. Hardly wait. I love it. Perfect. Thanks, Jim. Kelly, great question there. So Kelly was asking, do you know how close you are to your 1 million person goal? So it's, yeah, we're trying to think through what the best way to go about measuring that would be. You know, in terms of like total audience that we have across our different platforms, that's about 15,000 people. We're thinking about putting together like an actual, you know, survey that we do on an annual basis. to really get a pulse on this. I would guess it would be, you know, much lower than 1,500 or sorry, 15,000. But at the same time, it's like the one thing that I think we've really like nailed more than anything, or is more important than anything, is kind of like this concept of mission market fit. I feel this like incredible amount of support from the community on bringing mindful gardening to as many people as possible. And so I think that we're on the right path with that. And then we're continuing to figure out kind of like that product market fit. And I think that the gardening kits, the education with YouTube, all of that is going to allow us to, you know, really start growing in even larger leaps and bounds. So yeah, great question there. And definitely please continue to ask that one, because I love to keep people up to speed on that. And it also like really, you know, keeps us accountable to that mission. So thank you for asking. Oh, thank you for all the kind words coming through here, folks. Thank you, Angelo. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Jane. Perfect. Diane, shoot me through that question in terms of compost by email, jordan@mindandsoil.com. Susan, thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and start shutting her down here. Joe, thank you so much. Renee, thank you. I'm so happy that you've gotten so much value from it this past season here. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the words there. Jan, great question on grow lights. Monios is what I absolutely love. Jan, shoot me an email, jordan@mindandsoil.com, because we're going to have a whole bunch of those available. So yeah, just email me in terms of grow lights there. Perfect. Best champagne. Angela, I'm a big fan of Prosecco here. I think I've got a La Marca one here. Alrighty, folks. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all so much for the kind words here. Have an absolutely great end of November and through the winter. Stay tuned for those kits launching, that first birthday gift, some goodies throughout December through the holidays there. And I can't wait to catch all of you in 2022, which will be here before we know it.